Hey, welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of being a parent and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of two littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator.
And I'm Lori Cordles, parent of three in two different life stages. Two are launched and one is in high school. And I am also a parenting educator. And welcome to season 6. Hooray! Yay! Well, this season and today particularly, we are going to be talking about the research and reality around the idea of resilience.
Sure are. We get to look at these research based concepts, information, strategies around how we can parent through tough times, which is a big part of what resilience is. And, obviously, we've all been parenting through this pandemic that we've been living in. So that's one example of kind of a universal tough time we've all been through. But we do know that even in similar situations, every family responds and has a unique kind of take on what's going on. And so that depends on so many things like time, energy, resources, support, money, all kinds of things. And so
all kinds of things.
all kinds of
things.
things. So we're not going to pretend that we could understand every single perspective or every single family's take on why things are the way that they are for a tough time. So we want to focus this season on kind of these specific these specific strategies, multiple,
Yes.
that research gives us some insight into and that all parents can tap into, whatever the tough time may be.
Exactly. And do we want to share? Is this where the point where we share what our surprise is?
I think it might be.
Okay. You do it.
Okay.
Okay.
So we are lovely writer, content curator, blog writer extraordinaire, Barb Dunn Swanson, who has awesome experience and special interest in this topic of family resilience, gets to join us for our episode today, as well as kind of throughout this season. We're hoping to get little tidbits of insight from her. So we're so excited to have you today, Barb. Thanks so much for joining us.
I am thrilled to be able to join you because, like you mentioned, yes, we've all been navigating this pandemic, but the idea of how we come through it and the idea of resilience is something that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm glad to join you today.
Yes. And so Barb is also a human sciences specialist in family life with Lori and I here and Mackenzie at Iowa State University Extension Outreach. She's also a fabulous educator. We love parenting educator. We love having her on our team.
We do. We're so grateful that you agreed to join us, Barb. We know that it was not something that you ever intended to happen for the season at all, let alone the idea that we're kind of roping you into, 6 or 7 episodes, we think. But anyway,
I wanted to say, hey, where this kind of whole idea started for me was when I had an opportunity to talk a little bit with Iowa Public Radio this winter time it was really, and they were asking questions about what we were hearing about how parents were being impacted by the pandemic. And when I thought about that particular interview, it reminded me that maybe we could talk about some of these things on a season of resilience. So I think it all worked out for the good, and I'll just look forward to what we can explore here and some of the strategies we can share with families who are dealing not only with pandemic but other tough times as they go through their journey in life.
Absolutely. So we want to dive in and explain this word resilience that we're tossing around. And sometimes we say resiliency and sometimes we say resilience. Same thing.
Yep.
Just a little different variation. But one interesting definition, actually several authors kind of contribute to it. So McCubbin, Holly and Dahan and Simon and colleagues help us dive into this definition that family resilience is the ability of a family to respond positively to an adverse event and emerged strengthened, more resourceful, and more confident. And I just think oh, what hope, right? So tough times, but come through it positively, right? To find positivity in it and then emerge even stronger. And with these new skills, I just love that.
Mackenzie, One thing I think about in terms of what tough times can look like, sure enough, we're in the midst of the pandemic,
Mm.
but I think about what other tough times can look like.
Mm.
I remember when you and your family moved homes,
Mhm.
and I
Yes.
remember you explaining to your daughter that, "Hey, we're moving to a new neighborhood." And you know what? When kids have to move to a new neighborhood and maybe miss out on their friends, that's a tough time.
It
Yes.
is.
Kids have just recently completed the school year, and there were all those tests to be taken.
Mm.
That is a tough time,
Mm.
right? How about even during the pandemic when maybe there were times we couldn't go to play at the park? The park was
Mm.
closed. We
Mhm.
couldn't get out there on the slides. We couldn't swing in the swings, and that's what we do every day.
Yes.
Those are tough times. So we all experience tough times. I even think of what about the death of a family pet? Now that is a big difficult situations that families navigate. So tough times can be different for so many. And I want us to keep that in mind that it isn't just the pandemic we're talking about here. Resilience comes when we can apply certain strategies and get through those tough times.
You're so right. And, actually, there's research that supports that as well. So I'll share with you a little bit of research from Prime, Wade, and Brown. And they actually did some research during the pandemic. And so, yes, their research was focused on that tough time of being in the pandemic. But one of the things that they recognized was exactly what you were talking about. Tough times vary for families, and how the family is impacted will also vary. So, you walked us right into that idea of, at the Science of Parenting, we say there is more than one way to raise great kids. When it comes to resiliency, there is more than one way for a family to get through a tough time and
Oh, for
tap
sure.
into their resiliency, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Well, and even as I think about, the two of us, we share a lot of similarities in some ways, but even the great variability between the three of our families, how
Mhm.
we respond, even like if we go with the pandemic, knowing that we've all kind of been having this common experience of the pandemic, but experiencing it in our own way. So, like, Lori, how would you say your family has kind of come through the pandemic? What were some of the experiences that come to mind, or some ways that your family showed resilience?
Well, I think back to the episode that we did on rituals. So my children are older. And so what they experienced was a lot of loss of rituals. They missed out on
Mm.
very specific school events, very specific college experiences, very specific young adults, rites of passage. And so
Yes.
for them, they had to get through that idea that they were losing the opportunity to experience the ritual, maybe the way their parents did or the way their
Mm.
siblings did. How about
Oh,
you with younger children?
gosh. Yeah, I and man, are we like self-promoting or what? Because I'm like, well, we, a lot of routines in our
Mhm.
the other bonus
The
episode we
other
did.
bonus episode, right? We must have had
But
stuff to say about that.
that must have been a good topic. But I think of, we did like our family had like 4 rounds of quarantine, and we had
Mm,
school closures, and we had, childcare challenges, and just a lot of different to our normal. Like a lot of,
mm,
okay, instead of trying to get out the door in the morning, we're just like trying to get to the office in the house, or trying to get, okay, I've got this meeting, you've got that one, sorting through a lot of that. But I do think of, it was a tough time. I don't want to minimize that things were difficult when they were, but also the communication that we had to practice, my
mm.
co-parent and I, and honestly, the communication I had to practice with my kids, especially my preschooler.
Yes.
We tended to talk about the pandemic and the virus as the sick germ.
Mm,
That was like the language we used in our house. And I think of all of the conversations we had to explain of why the park is closed, why we're going to wear masks if we go anywhere, why we can't see our grandparents right now,
mhm.
why all of these things. And it's like, those are tough conversations to figure out how to have. Um, and I just like, but we did it. Like
You
we
did
had
it.
them. And the
Yes.
communication practice that we gained of like, we can talk about tough stuff. Like
Yes.
we can come through this together. So there was
Yeah.
resilience there.
I love that.
hmm So that kind of brings us to this kind of third part of resilience that we wanted to tap into. And there's actually this 3-part definition. So Dahan and Holly put together this article in like the mid 90s, actually. There was all this family resilience research, and they're like, okay, everybody's kind of doing their own thing here. Can we like sort this, get it all, kind of find the common thread? And so they put together this 3-part definition of resiliency. And so I'm thinking maybe each of us can take a part. We'll each
Perfect.
explain one part of this definition. So as we come to understand this idea of resilience, the first thing that Holly and Dahan point out to us is that resilience surfaces in the face of hardship. So it's
Mm.
not about, you know what, we're resilient because bad things haven't happened to us, right? I've had an easy life. Actually, the opposite is true. When families go through tough times, they can gain resilience. And so it does involve the manner in which we respond to these difficult things. What's our perception of what's going on? How does our family cope with it? What skills do we have? What resources do we tap into? So, but we know
Mhm.
resilience happens in the face of hardship. Laura, do you want to take the second one?
Yes. So the second one is that resiliency actually carries this idea of, or this property of, buoyancy. And I chuckled, especially thinking that you gave me this one, because sometimes people think of me as Tigger, but I'm literally bouncing, in my seat right now, thinking about buoyancy, because
Yes.
what we talk about with resiliency, then the second idea is that individuals can bounce back or rebound from adversity, because resiliency just carries that property along with it. There is
Yeah.
this rebound opportunity. How about
Yes.
the
I've
third
heard-
one, Barb? Oh,
Yes.
Well, the third one is that, generally speaking, resilience focuses on wellness. Maybe rather than looking at adversity, looking at wellness and looking at the positive, so to speak. And I think that's the way that we want to come at resilience as we look at parenting per se. We want to look at how can we help look at the wellness around the strategies that might help us cope with whatever those difficult times look like. And they're going to look different for each family, no doubt about it,
Mm.
but the wellness around it.
Yes. Those strengths, like that word is what I tend to think of is like, instead of thinking of like this hard time, and in all fairness, we kind of are calling this season tough times, but also right alongside that, calling it, but resilience, but the family resilience, those strengths that we gain from those experiences that we've had. So I do think we need to like pause and have like a little reality. We just said there's a huge difference in experience in the way that families respond. I even just think of like how our lives between the three of us, the way
Mhm.
that family resilience has shown up and the way that tough times have shown up. So like, would you each be willing? Like, could we each give like an example of like
Okay.
maybe something that was considered kind of a tough time, but also how you found resilience in it?
Yes, I'll start. And I think that it's really important to remember that Barb talked about the idea that, the loss of a pet is a tough time. Moving to a new house is a tough time. But,
Yes.
we're talking about just getting out of the pandemic. And so, okay, my example is that my girls in my family and my co-partner and I, we experienced a divorce. And so as we were sharing those 3 key pieces of resilience, that resiliency does surface in the face of hardship, we were able to rebound, and we were able to find this way of wellness and strength. And one of the things that my co-partner and I did from the very beginning was we kind of created this pretend team. We called it Team Kids, and we would use that phrase as a way to indicate to the other person that, whatever decision or whatever phrase or whatever comment I was about to make, I'm really trying to focus on it from this idea of the kids are first. I want to talk about the kids. I want to look at this from their
Yes.
perspective. And so, we sometimes would even end our conversation with "Go Team Kids," because we were so proud of the strength and the wellness approach, that third key that Barb brought up of, okay, this is a tough time, but we can bounce back and we can figure out a way to be stronger. So we are much better communicators, honestly,
Yes.
because of our Team Kids mantra. How about
I
you?
love that. I would say I've heard the term associated with resilience. There's the idea of bounce back, but
Mhm.
also the idea of bounce forward.
Yes.
Like, instead of bouncing back to where we were before this tough time, like, I see, in our conversations and hearing the way that you talk about your co-parent and the communication you guys have, how you guys bounce forward.
Mhm.
And,
Oh,
hopefully that's
absolutely.
what family resilience is.
Mhm.
So the one that comes to mind for me for a tough time was after we had our first child, I really struggled with postpartum depression.
Mm.
And so I think of, that was a tough time. We like sometimes talk about it in terms of like, ooh, dark place. But I think of, even though at that time we maybe weren't tapping into these specific strengths, but how over time my co-parent and my partner, that we were able to communicate about our needs. We were able to express concern to each other and do it sooner rather than
Mm.
later. And so, yeah, I think of the communication in large part, but also our confidence in asking for help. Instead of thinking like, oh, I'm having a hard time, I need to like hide out, or it's like, oh, you know what? We're having a hard time. We need to reach out.
Mhm.
And so our confidence and our ability to do that has been a huge source of resilience. When we had our second child, right? We came in more prepared, and it was like, all right, we're going to tap into these skills and tap into these resources. But then also how we get to communicate that with others, and how we get to share that experience of like, be prepared to ask for help, have a plan for how you'll communicate with each other. And that way I think we got to bounce
Exactly.
forward. What
I
about you, Barb?
Well, before I jump into mine, I just want to say both of you did something really, really important. You were checking in with one another.
Mm.
Mm,
As
true.
parents, you didn't just keep silent about how you were feeling. You checked in with your co parent to see how best you could manage what it was you were up against. And that is such a strength. That
Mm,
is a resilience step. And so
Mhm.
I applaud both of you for that.
mm,
I want to
thanks.
tell you what the tough time that I think about was one of the things I did about 5 years ago is I transitioned in my job,
Mm.
and that was to go from being a 4-H professional to being a human sciences professional. And I'll tell you, I had a lot of scary times because I didn't know if I could do it. I
Mm,
knew what 4-H looked like. I knew how to work with 4-H kids and their parents, and I didn't know if I could learn all of the curriculum that comes with human sciences, or if I could manage the requests that a county may have regarding human sciences programming. But I had an awful lot of people that walked right alongside of me, and the Science of Parenting team is one clear example. All of you really reached out and helped me to see where my skill and ability was going to lie. And we've been able to move through that tough time because I've just said I've got to learn these new curriculum. I've got to ask questions and reach out to people, just like you mentioned, Mackenzie, reaching
mm.
out, asking questions. And I was able to come through that tough time. I think I am doing okay now. And I just think all of us will experience tough times differently, and
Mhm.
there's no judgment from
Mm,
anybody about what those tough times can look like.
yes. Oh,
Absolutely.
thanks so much for sharing that, Barb. And I think you make a great point about like the comparison
Mhm.
of tough times, that even if maybe I was quote unquote better off or in a better position or people talk about the example with the pandemic, like we're in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat.
Mhm.
Even if that's the case, that it's not a matter of comparing our tough times, even if they're similar or really different, or someone's loss of a pet versus someone's loss of a parent, right?
Mhm.
That it's not about comparing those suffering or comparing the coping or comparing those things. It's about letting each family experience it,
Mhm.
and that hopefully helping them navigate it and supporting them.
Yes.
Mm, absolutely. So that really brings us into our strategies for this week. And actually, we're kind of cheating again. I
We
feel like I
are.
say we cheat a lot. We're not cheaters, maybe a little. But that we're going to go through some strategies, but then we're going to trickle them in throughout this whole season. So this week's strategies are actually going to become this whole season's kind of strategies as well. But we have Dr. Kenneth Ginsburg's Essential Building Blocks of Resilience, or as I learned them, the 7 C's of resilience. And we know one of the huge thing we think about as parents is like, okay, yeah, how our family has come through this resilient, come through tough times, but also how do I raise kids who are resilient, right? The tough times that will happen to them that are going to be out of my control. Like, how do we raise resilient kids? And so these 7 C's of resilience allow us to do that and give us some ideas. And okay, so I like had this little jig from when I was in college and when I had to memorize these. So I'm going to try to say it slow so you can actually understand me. But I'll say all 7 and then we'll break them each down a little bit. So the 7 C's of resilience are competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, control. That is hard. I really want to spit them out about 3 times the speed of that. Competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, control. So, all right. Now I'm appeased. I
I
able
love
to do it. Okay, so we're not going to dig into these too deep because, like I said, we're going to be talking about it all season. But we do want to give you just a brief introduction of like, okay, what are each of these? So I'll do the first few. We'll kind of spread them out, just quickly explain. So these are kind of the skills and abilities that help build resilience. So the first one is competence. So this is really the actual ability to do something, to complete a task, and that we have the ability or the mastery to do so, that we are competent. Versus confidence, very similar, but it's an added piece of your belief in that ability. So not only am I able, but do I believe in my ability to do so? Is confidence. So those two are really closely tied. Then the third one is connection. This is really just about relationships and meaningful interactions and relationships with others. So Lori, do you want to tackle the next few?
I will. So the fourth one, the fourth C is character. And character is exactly that. It talks about our personal integrity and the idea that having a moral compass is important. The fifth C then is contribution. And as adults, we want to feel worthy that we're adding value, but you know what? Kids do too. And by learning new skills, contributing, volunteering, reaching out, and even just being part of the neighborhood around them, children actually can gain this idea, this sense of contribution. I'm contributing. How about the next ones?
Coping. We, excuse me, we all want to think that we can cope well when there are tough times. And so that's a C that's pretty essential. It's a building block for sure. So coping is one of them. And then the last one is just that whole notion of a sense of control. We all want to think that I can control something about a situation. And we even think about our toddlers who are growing in independence. And we hear them say that they want to try everything. They want to try to put their own shoes on. I do it. It's that whole notion of I have control. So I'm excited about this whole season and the next sessions because being able to break down these C's because they are essential. They are foundational. They're the building blocks from which resilience can come. That's going to be exciting, and the strategies that will come alongside of that. I'm excited to see where this takes us.
Yes, and I think of this idea that I heard somewhat recently of, when we ask parents what do they want for their kids in adulthood, a lot of times what we say is, well, we want our kids to be happy. And actually, like reframing that instead of saying we want our kids to be happy, this idea of resilience being, I want my kids to be able to handle whatever life throws their way, right? I can't control whether tough times happen. There will be things that are out of my control throughout their life.
Oof. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And so that we can use these 7 C's and these other strategies we're going to talk about to build resilient kids instead of just happy kids. Yeah, that just like really gave me hope. And I love, we know I love a framework, right? And so having 7 C's, and you may happen to notice throughout this season that these episodes tend to start with R. And that maybe was like my own little cheater framework. There's that cheating again. My bad.
See, I think we have to remind ourselves that it's just flexible thinking that we're having. We're having
That's what it
flexible thinking. Yes.
We're flexible.
Yes. So, okay, well, that kind of just leads us right into the portion of our episode where we would typically bring in our producer, Mackenzie DeYoung, and she would share a random question and give us the opportunity to practice our flagship strategy of stop, breathe, and talk. And we're going to change that up a little this season. Yes, Mackenzie's still back there. She's making sure we sound good, look good, and say all the right things. And we're going to ask Barb to kind of share some thoughts and ideas about our topic. And especially because she does have such an interest in resilience and resiliency. I want to ask Barb this question then. How about this, Barb? What are you thinking?
Here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that connection is what I want to start with. When I think about resilience and I think about being a member of a family and being responsible for helping that family navigate tough times, I think about how can I make a meaningful connection, not only with my co-parent, but perhaps with the children in the family. Maybe how can I even connect with resources that are outside my family? Because perhaps I need additional resources that are beyond my family. Maybe I need to check in with a family doctor. Maybe I need to check in with a community resource that has something that I might need. Maybe I want to check in with my child's school, for example. Making those connections and being intentional about realizing that it's okay to want to connect with people. We're all hardwired for connection from birth, aren't we?
Even the
Yes.
introverts.
Yes.
Yes.
And that whole notion of attachment theory is so strong. We want to attach to our children and they want to attach to us. And one of the things we can do is be meaningful and intentional about connecting with them during the tough times, not letting someone sit and suffer in silence, but intentionally opening the door for communication. So as we go through this season, we're going to continue to hit those 7 C's. But today I really wanted to focus on connection and just say, maybe throw it back to each of you. What are some intentional ways that you found to connect either with your co-parent or with one of your children, maybe to make a meaningful difference in their life during some of these tough times?
Ooh, that's a good stop, breathe, talk.
Yeah.
Plot twist there.
She threw it back.
Connection. I wasn't expecting that. You know, honestly, I think I am very cognizant of the fact that that's not something that I probably made a conscious effort before. Like, what are you thinking? What are you thinking about this? How do you feel about this? And I definitely feel like rebounding and bouncing forward has given me that opportunity to increase that skill, make it very purposeful to ask, to check in and connect. Definitely.
And having littler kids, I still think a lot of the concept of like special time, or some people call it floor time, or that, it's super easy. I even think of yesterday, I was like, the things that I needed to get done for work required me to be out of town for a little bit. And then like that, we had commitments in the evening. And it was like, this whole day could really easily go by without me really connecting with my co-parent, with my kids. And so that morning I got up a little earlier and made sure I had some time to connect with the kids a little bit, even if it ended in tears when my husband had to take my toddler to the car when he wanted to be with me. But it was still right. I mean, so it doesn't always go the most.
Yeah.
But that to me, it's like, even 10 minutes, like,
Mhm.
which it sounds like, okay, gosh, you can't get 10 minutes of connection with your kids in a day. But some days it goes by so quick. Like, holy
does.
cow.
It does. No
So I
judgment.
just like, what if it's just 10 minutes? Like,
Exactly.
what if I just get 10 uninterrupted minutes or 5 and 5? Like,
Mhm.
so.
Yes.
Thank
That
you.
one's mine.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Thank you both. This is going to be a great season, and I just look forward to continuing the conversation.
We are just so glad to have you join us today, Barb. Especially, we kind of like gave her a nudge and a shove, like, you're going to be on the episode today. How about? So thanks so much for joining us. We're so excited.
She had flexible thinking.
She
Yes.
did.
She did.
So we'll hear from you again kind of throughout the season. Thanks so much.
You're
welcome.
Yes.
Mhm.
And we also recognize that every day families face many decisions. Sometimes the decisions are hard because a family is in the midst of some difficult or really tough times. And when this happens, families work together to get through those tough times and they bounce forward. I think I'm going to call that bounce forward from now on. And families can begin to utilize these building blocks of resilience that we're going to be sharing this season. And especially these 7 C's that we started to tease you with.
Yes. So, today talking about resilience, we really looked at it's about going through the hardship and coming out on the other side more confident, more resourceful, and even stronger. And that families do that in the pandemic or whatever the tough time is and
Mhm.
the variation in how they respond is. So we're going to keep looking at resilience. And in fact, next week, we're going to be looking at risk and protective factors. And so that we know these play a huge role in how we navigate tough times. So we will come back with particularly looking at how protective factors build resilience next week.
Excellent. Thanks. And I am so glad that you joined us today at the Science of Parenting podcast. Remember to subscribe to our weekly audio podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. You can also watch the show on video each week and join us on Facebook and Twitter at Science of Parent, and you'll see our content in your feed.
So please do come along with us as we tackle the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is hosted by Lori Kothals and Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung, with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.